Retro.
Hey, this is Catherine Tabor, Senator Padmé Amidala from Star Wars The Clone Wars, and you're listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Stay on the light side.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And it's Monday, and that means we are continuing our The Clone Wars rewatch. But before we get into that, Jay, you want to remind everybody where our social media contacts can be found?
Absolutely, Dennis. We are on Facebook and Instagram conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the digital line, the signal's boosted to maximum output, shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we are covering episode 4 of season 2 of the Clone Wars, which is called Senate Spy. And this will be a full spoiler discussion. Again, this has been out for years and years and years. So I hope you've watched it. If not, go watch it first, then come back for the discussion. So with that out of the way, Jay, you want to go ahead and give us the episode summary, please?
Sure thing. Anakin and Padmé's night at home is interrupted by a summons from Obi-Wan for Anakin to return to the Jedi Temple. When he arrives, the Jedi inform Anakin they want Padmé to spy on Senator Clovis, who they believe is conspiring with the Separatists. Despite her initial refusal to do so, Padmé changes her mind against Anakin's wishes and accompanies Clovis to Neimoidia for a meeting with the Trade Federation. Under the jealous eye of Anakin, Padmé discovers Clovis is helping the Separatists build a new droid foundry. She steals the plans and gets them to Anakin, but not before she is poisoned by the Trade Federation. Clovis coerces Lott Dod into handing over the antidote. With the antidote and the plans in hand, Anakin and Padmé return to Coruscant.
All right, so that is the good description of the episode. This is quite interesting. This episode features no one firing a blaster, no explosions, and no one igniting a lightsaber. This is all romance and political intrigue when it comes down to it. So with that having been said, Jay, what did you think about this episode overall?
Well, I think you just wrapped it up right there. I mean, what's more to say? But no, seriously, there's a lot with all these internal political machinations going on, between the Republic and the Senate and the Jedi Council, even, and how all they're kind of intertwined. And then, of course, the Separatists. And then, of course, there's espionage, intrigue, and a lot more character development that we see for, Padmé and Anakin as a couple, as they evolve into, their own into the Clone Wars. And, of course, there's all these bigger themes of trust and loyalty and, like you said, Anakin's jealousy and all the things that kind of set up stuff for later on. So I love this episode. And I was just saying, when we got into this one and I saw what it was, I was like, oh, yay, it's this arc. I don't know, I'm a sucker for the soap opera end of things sometimes. And this is definitely that. But what do you think?
I think I never really appreciated this episode until I sat down and wrote the notes for it today, because I guess I just wasn't interested on its surface. Let me phrase that. On the surface, this episode is about Anakin being jealous when it comes to Padmé and the attachment and everything that goes wrong with it. And it's just kind of like, okay, do I really need an entire episode about that? When especially it doesn't have any of those other things, no blasters, sabers, igniting explosions, any of that type of stuff. I mean, I feel like a Neanderthal saying that, but it is what it is. But when you sit back and think about it, and there was something that came up in the featurette on this, and it was Dave Filoni talking about the politics a little bit of what's going on with the Trade Federation and Neimoidia. And it's confusing because nowhere do they ever really explicitly state this anywhere in Star Wars. But the thing you have to understand is that Cato Neimoidia, home of the Neimoidians, who basically run the Trade Federation, is still part of the Republic. The Trade Federation is technically still part of the Republic, but they're kind of neutral in the war between the Republic and the Separatists. Lott Dod is a representative. We see him here. We see him do some sinister things, but everything he's doing is just kind of like cloak and dagger. He's hiding all this stuff. Lott Dod represents a corporation, and it's a neutral corporation selling arms to both sides of the war, much like what we see happen in The Last Jedi, as a matter of fact. It's one of the things that they talk about. The Jedi suspect all of this, that the Trade Federation are criminals. They're right, but they can't prove it. And I'm paraphrasing and actually repeating a lot of stuff that Dave Filoni just said. And the Trade Federation is not the only one. The Banking Clan and the Commerce Guild are also in on this. So it was kind of an aha moment for me watching this episode and taking my notes over it today. And I grew to appreciate it so much more about why it was so key that they catch Clovis in the act the way they do, and why it was so important for Padme to put on this ruse that she was interested in rekindling their former relationship to catch him in the act like that. And with that having done, like I said, my appreciation for this episode went way up.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. There's a lot of moving parts within all of these different factions within the galaxy that are vying for power and, just in some cases just being heard and being justified, as a viable part of what's going on in the galaxy. So, yeah, and you're right. I mean, I forget too exactly where. I mean, there's easy to pick the heroes on both sides kind of thing, but there's a lot more than two sides. I mean, this is definitely a multifaceted war with, like I said, a lot of moving parts. And you're right. It's good to put that into perspective. And
Mhm.
this episode does help to do that.
So we get to meet Senator Rush Clovis of Scipio, and he was adopted by a Neimoidian. We get that from another source, and he's become part of the Banking Clan, and he represents them in the Senate. And as we've been talking about, he is conspiring with the Trade Federation to basically fund and build a new droid foundry on Geonosis. We'll see Poggle the Lesser in this episode kind of hiding in the library, which is kind of funny when Padme shows up and Poggle's
Mhm.
hiding on the other side of the wall. Excuse me. But like I said, the Jedi suspect that this type of stuff is going on, but they can't prove it. They had already asked Padme to spy on Rush, but she refused, but they didn't tell her why.
Mhm.
It's because they suspected of him of working with the Separatists. And it's not until Anakin spills that little bit of information that she decides that she has to do, that and some other things here. But with that as a background for Rush Clovis, what did you think of this character?
Well, this is our obviously our first introduction to him, and I mean, in some ways, he seems like he's very, smooth and is very sincere in some ways. Because when he first meets back up with Padme and whatnot, like he just seems really happy to see her. But he's also in a lot of ways just really slimy and just all about himself. And but I mean, he does prove that he's got at least some inner, compassion for everything that's been going on. And even though it's not just Padme, I think that he does have a conscience in some ways. So yeah, he's one that I feel like is could go both ways in terms of how you're looking at him, essentially. But what do you think of him?
Well, I can't separate what I know about him from outside materials from the way he's presented in this episode. And so, yeah, you know a bit about his past, how he was orphaned and he was basically brought up in the Banking Clan. And so, kind of in a way, he's doing all he knows how to do, which is,
Right.
you work both sides. It's all about making a profit. It's all about doing business. But then in this episode, he cares about Padme. That is his weakness. Lott Dod identifies that and says, "Hey, we can manipulate this." They poison her because they can use it to get to him on this. But at some point, it's like the conscience you're talking about is like, where does that come up? I mean, what? It's an interesting brand of ethics that the Banking Clan and all these neutral corporations work under, that they can get away with selling gear to both sides of the war on this.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
pure war profiteering for no purpose other than profit. They're not standing up for any particular beliefs other than making money on all that. And so I know where he ends up based on what happens in season 6 of the Clone Wars. But at
Right.
this point, just watching this episode, it's like, this guy is slimy. I mean, it is, he takes this demonstration of interest by Padme and runs with it hard.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I don't know. I didn't particularly like him. And now that I'm thinking about it, I still don't like him after knowing what
Yeah.
ends up happening to him here. But he definitely makes an interesting character there.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, he attempts to manipulate things, and then that becomes his downfall. And I mean, his ambitions is what really ends up outdoing him. You know what I mean?
right,
Or
right.
undoing him, I should say.
This episode starts off with Anakin showing up at Padme's apartment, and they haven't had an opportunity to spend time together. He walks in the door and says something about, hey, I caught a ride on a freighter with a captain, and they were hauling some food, so he brought some home. And he uses the word home, which really melts Padme's heart because she called her
Mhm.
apartment his home. But before long, he has to leave because he's been getting calls from Obi-Wan all day, which he's been ignoring. But it basically gets to the point where he can't ignore them anymore. And then he says, duty comes first, especially in a time of war, which she's not happy about it. She insists that she's not angry. I don't want to say she pouts, but she doesn't do a good job hiding her hurt feelings. What do you think about their interaction and especially that conversation that they had?
Well, Anakin's so sweet. He brings that food or whatever it is home,
It's
and
sushi.
is it sushi? Is that what it is? Oh my
Yes, he
gosh, that
says
is
sushi and
fantastic.
Orabesh on the top, and then it says like something about takeout on the side.
I love that. I love that so
Mm,
much, and of course she would figure that out, but,
mhm.
I wanna get the recipe for her 5 blossom bread, I just wanna say that, and there's that cute little banter between the 2 of them where he's like, "You have a specialty?" Kind of a
Uh-huh.
thing, so it's very domestic in that way, and it's very sweet, but, I will say that I feel like it was really uncharacteristic of Padme to, as you put it, pout about Anakin having to leave because as much as, they both want to spend time together and they both are just, gobbling up all of these stolen moments that they possibly can when they can. Padme's always been the one that's been, duty first. We got to do this. I mean, even in one of the last episodes that we
Yep.
talked about, I mean, she was the one that was like, oh, Anakin, he's like, oh, what this means more than I do, to you than I do. And now she's kind of acting the same way. So what's up, Padme?
Yeah, the episode you're talking about was the hostage crisis, the final
Yes.
episode of season 1.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was supposed to be on his little sabbatical for his meditative retreat, and then he ended up sneaking over to her office and was hanging out for her and trying to get her to run away with him for a week. Nobody would even know we're gone. And now the shoe's on the other foot, and she doesn't and she's using some of the very same arguments that he is in
Yeah.
this case. And so I don't like that inconsistency. But that having been said, Anakin was kind of clumsy with the way he was talking about that. Duty comes first, especially in a time of war. That's the deal they made. There's no denying it because they're going to
Mm-hmm.
keep their relationship secret. And if he does not respond to these calls, then the relationship is going to get blown out of the water. It's, that's going to get exposed. She wants to remain a senator. He wants to remain on the Jedi Council. None of that stuff is possible if the relationship goes public that way.
Right.
So for her to now be pouting about it, especially after the way she talked to him about it at the end of season 1, it struck me as a little uncharacteristic. But I think
Yes.
really it's just a symptom of the deal they made. It's
Mm-hmm.
when Anakin said in Attack of the Clones, well, we could keep a secret. And she said, I couldn't live like that. Could you? But then
Oh
somewhere
yeah.
along the line, she's like, well, I love you. What choice do we have?
Mm-hmm.
And, so anyway, at the risk of being redundant here, they are dealing with the consequences of the decisions they made. And they both seem to take turns
Yeah.
kind of not being happy with the other one about it.
Right, right. It's like when it's convenient for one, it's inconvenient for the other and vice versa.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yep.
So Anakin gets this mission from the council. That's not even a mission, it's a task at this point, which is we suspect Clovis of working with the Separatists. We can't prove it. We can't spy on him because that's too obvious. So we want Padme to do it. She's already turned us down. We want you to go to talk to her. And it was funny because, this notion that Padme and Clovis had a romantic relation comes up, and Anakin's like, "Huh, I didn't know that." And Yoda's like,
Yeah.
"Well, why
Why
would know
would
that? Why
you?
would you?"
Right. Yes.
Which is, and the thing is like Obi-Wan like arches an eyebrow.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
totally, suspected all this. I mean, he knows that Anakin's got this crush on Padme at the very least. And
Mhm.
so, when he hears things like that, it's just like, oh, Anakin. But,
Right.
Yoda, on the other hand, is
Cringe.
completely clueless about the whole thing.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. I love that little eyebrow raise that Obi-Wan gives because you're right. I mean, I think Obi-Wan, he's always known that there were feelings there and that Anakin has a certain amount of attachment to Padme. Obviously, he doesn't know
Mhm.
exactly how deep it goes, but yeah. It's very convenient that Yoda wants Anakin to go talk to Padme. But I think that also comes down to the fact that he knows that he's known her forever, going all the way
Right.
back to, the Phantom Menace, so it's convenient for him
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Anakin.
But then Anakin shows up at the Senate, and this is where, if I'm scoring this as a fight, I
Mhm.
think Padme loses on the round one with what happened in her apartment. Anakin loses round two in a major way here in the Senate, but
Yes.
basically saying he's not going to allow her to do it. It's too dangerous. And she's come back like, well, you've been objected to these type of things before. And she sees right through this because his jealousy is coming out over this relationship with Clovis here. And,
Right.
and then it's, she goes and then she says it's because she didn't know that Clovis was being accused of being a separatist collaborator. But I think it's just as much that Anakin said, her husband says, you can't do this. And she's defying him. I think drives her just as much to do it as the other.
Right, yeah, because as soon as he says, "I won't let you," she's like, "Wait a second, you won't let me?
Uh-huh.
Excuse-moi?" Kind of thing. And they weren't I mean, they were kind of secretive while they were walking through the Senate building, but yet again, they kinda weren't. I mean, it was obvious that some of the things that they were saying to each other as they were walking, if any other bystander was halfway listening, would kind of figure, "What the heck's going on with these 2?" Kind of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they try and cover it by addressing each other as General Skywalker and Senator Amidala. And
Right.
then, he leans in, says like, "You're still angry about last night?" And she's like,
Mhm.
"No, I'm not angry." And then the trivia guide for this episode points out that once they get into her pod and it lifts off, that there's noise dampeners, so they couldn't be overheard
Okay.
there.
Okay.
And you'll notice in the background, there's a number of pods floating around. So like Senate business happens in that rotunda, but it's one pod might flap another one for them to do business. It's not always like everyone's there just to listen to a debate or, someone presenting something at that central
Mhm.
DS. But
Well,
at any
that's
rate,
cool then, though. Yeah, I didn't know they
yeah.
had noise dampeners. That's cool.
Mhm. So from there, Anakin's going to be the bodyguard slash pilot for this mission, and he disguises himself as someone from Naboo. And this is like pure high school. He charges up onto Padme's ship
Yes.
before Padme and Clovis can, and breaks the restraint on one of the seats so they can't sit right next to each other.
Oops.
And then, well, yeah, and then when they take off and Clovis is kind of moving in for a kiss, he does a hard turn, so he flies out of his seat and lands and has to get back up and then restrain himself so it doesn't happen again. He's just running all kinds of jealous interference there, but I don't know. For an episode that I don't think is particularly funny overall, I did get a chuckle out of all that.
Oh, I agree, and I do think that in some small way, Padme might have actually appreciated that a little bit because you could tell that she was, when Anakin was seeing him Clovis going in for, that kiss that she was like, "Eh."
Yeah.
So, did her a little favor maybe.
Do you think she was enjoying making Anakin jealous though?
I don't know. I mean, I hate to think that she's getting any kind of satisfaction out of that. But I guess in a way, maybe part of that because especially because he said, I won't let you do this. I think that was the
Yeah.
straw for her, that was like, okay, you say that, just watch. Just watch me.
Yeah, because at the end of this episode, she says something about like, "I'm sorry, I made you doubt me," and then he's like, I can't
Mhm.
remember exactly what he says, but it's like, that never happened, or never. And the thing is though, is that in a way, I kind of think she, this whole thing is kind of about punishing him for that
Mhm.
behavior. So whether she enjoyed all that, I think she enjoyed getting back at him. I don't think she enjoyed being necessarily in that position, I guess is the
Yeah.
best way I could
Well,
phrase
and
it.
yeah, no, that's a good way to phrase it. And didn't she say when she was, talking to the council that she would do whatever was necessary?
Uh-huh.
And it was like, okay, that was quite a dig, to Anakin too. I mean, the poor guy is already not able to do anything about this really and just
Uh-huh.
has to stand by and watch it all unfold. But to say something like that is kind of, I don't know, that was hitting below the
Especially
belt.
when he can't say anything there. I mean, yeah,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So she was being
Oh,
pretty petty herself. Let's just put it that
oh,
way.
definitely. Yeah, I mean, this was a squabble. I mean, it was a
Yes.
squabble with like galactic ramifications, literally.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, which I mean, how many of us can ever say we did that with our significant others? But
And that's the truth.
so they get to Cato Neimoidia, and this has been described in a bunch of places, and we got glimpses of it in the movies of Cato Neimoidia. But seeing it here is like the best shot of Cato Neimoidia we ever got. With their cities that are essentially like strung up on platforms between gigantic spires on the planet.
Yeah.
That was just so cool, and
It's
it's one
quite
of the things that
beautiful.
yeah, that I just love about Star Wars is when they come up with these unique environments, whether it's Coruscant or Hoth or this, just the imagination it takes to come up with these type of things.
Mhm. I agree.
Yeah. So Lott Dod meets them at the landing platform, and Padme apologizes for arriving unannounced, but that she's looking forward to kind of repairing their working relationship after they got off on the wrong foot. And Lott Dod, being the politician that he is like, "Oh, I'd like that too, my dear." I can't do his voice, otherwise I would. And he's not that major of a character. But he is not happy at all that she is there because she essentially threatens everything that's going on. I mean, Clovis showed up to finalize the deal between the banking clan, the Trade Federation, and the Geonosians to build this new droid foundry for the Separatists. And, he can't have a Republic center poking her nose and everything.
Right, and Padme's always been a thorn in the side of the Neimoidians anyways, so, there's that too.
Yeah. And so from there, we got Anakin kind of on the edge, simmering with jealousy around, Padme is conveniently deposited in her room. But of course, she's not going to stay there. Well, Clovis, Dodd, and Poggle are kind of conducting their meeting, and she nearly walks right in on everything. She clearly got a glimpse and had something that was up because later, after dinner, after she's been poisoned, she asks Clovis to get her water, and then she manages to steal the plans at that point. Uh, I, you know, I kind of like the spycraft that was going on with all of this, and and then that encompasses a lot of things. Dodd poisoning the cup. He says, "Let's both drink from the same cup to kind of like celebrate our new beginning and our joint." I can't remember exactly what he says, but the whole point is like a show of unity there. So he takes a
Mhm.
drink, but then rubs the poison to prove that the drink's not poison, but then rubs the poison on the edge of the glass with his thumb right before she
Yeah,
drinks.
yeah, that
Um,
was quite the move.
yeah, it was a clever little bit. And then Padme, she's clearly feeling ill, but she takes advantage of that to get rid of Clovis long enough so that she can steal the pans. And her trying to cycle through the code words before she
Oh,
finally lands on
yes.
Padme, and that ends up being
Padme.
the code word. Yeah,
Cringe.
yeah, it was a nice touch as well.
It was,
Uh,
definitely.
right, but you know, she then gets into a rather desperate position because she's got the plans in her hand when Clovis shows back up with the drink, so she has to hide it behind her back. And Clovis is like, "Well, take my hand and we'll go for a tour of the palace." And so she does that lunge to kind of embrace him, like, "Oh, you've been so kind to me," right as Anakin walks into the room.
Mhm.
And to their credit, you know, she turns this into an opportunity to hand off the disc behind Clovis's back.
Mhm, yes. That was
So
pretty slick. That was like
yeah,
a Mr. and Mrs. Smith move right there.
right. And they the jealousy gets put aside at that point. They accomplish the mission, and Anakin comes in. He's all jealous at this moment, but he sees that she's done what she was supposed to do, and
Mhm.
it's kind of like all of his resentment evaporated in that moment.
It did, yeah, it was like a complete, like, turnaround in that very second. You're absolutely right.
Right. Yeah, and there's not a whole lot left after that. I mean, at this point, Dod was right. Clovis's weak point was Padmé, but Clovis forces Dod to turn over the antidote, and then Anakin leaves with it. Clovis thought he was going to get the plans back, but Anakin's like, "Nope, I'm taking that back
Right.
with me to the Coruscant." Is this the same droid foundry that's on Geonosis in a few episodes?
I don't know. I can't remember, and I would have to, like, watch it and then go back and watch this one again too. I don't have that good of a memory, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I never thought about that before. I mean, because this is not an episode that I would typically sit down and pay attention to for the reasons I was talking about earlier. But since we're doing a episode by episode review of this, I paid a lot more attention to it. But I was like, when they get back to Geonosis, they do blow up a foundry
Mhm.
there.
That's
And I was
true.
wondering if it's this one.
It may very well be. That's a
So,
good point.
okay. Yeah. So that brings us to the end of the episode. I'm just trying to think if there was anything that we left out. Oh, yeah. The HoloNet reference was the first time that was officially used in canon in this
Oh,
episode.
okay. Oh, that's
Yeah.
cool.
And the trivia guide also pointed out in an earlier draft, they consider using Paolo as opposed to Clovis because that was the
Mhm.
12-year-old boy Padme was interested in that she talked
Yes.
about back on Naboo. But the thing that they
Dark
pointed out,
hair, very dreamy.
yeah,
Yeah.
you memorized all that, didn't you? Yeah, they said the reason they dropped it is because one, Paolo was only ever, in the junior senator program, and then he went into art after that.
Mhm.
And then two, he wouldn't have the necessary connections being from Naboo to be part of the making clan or anything like that. So it made more
Mhm.
sense to use a different character.
Mhm. Yeah, it totally makes more sense. It'd be fun if Paulo showed up somewhere along the way, though. He doesn't, but, it would have been fun.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah. It's
like
one of those
Anakin
lingering
and
things.
Padme or yeah, looking somewhere, at, like, some artwork or something, and there's Paulo.
Or how about this? Encountering Luke and Leia after Return of the Jedi at some point,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
and being able
Yeah,
to tell
that
them
would
something about
be
their mother. So
amazing. Oh my gosh, that'd be amazing.
coming to a bookshelf near you,
Good
2027.
call. Love it. Love it. And what about the fembots that Lott Dod
Oh,
had?
the Betty droids.
The
Yeah,
Betty droids, yes, okay, yep, because I couldn't think of what I just kept calling them fembots.
yeah, yeah. Well, they had that Betty Boop type of appearance there,
Mhm.
and so they were called. I can't remember what episode that they first appeared and got called those Betty droids, but yeah, yeah. I mean, that was an interesting choice for your domestic servants there. I mean, 3PO, we haven't mentioned him, but he was along this entire
Mhm.
time, and he kept getting put out because Anakin kept telling him like, that's enough. Or Clovis, he kept getting dismissed by everybody. Padme,
He
Clovis,
did.
Anakin, whatever. And he was
Poor guy.
so hurt by all that.
He
He's a
was.
protocol droid, and he's not getting an opportunity to do what he was programmed for.
Yeah, he had no protocol to protocol for.
It's like, why
For
did you
sure.
even bring me on this mission? But
Yes, exactly. I have to
anything else?
say that
Oh, go
I
ahead.
have to point out Padme's evening gown, that purple evening gown that was just somehow stuck on her. It had
Yeah.
no straps, had no nothing. But I will say there is a cosplayer that actually pulled that off with some sheer pieces of material, and she did a fantastic job. So I can't think of who that was at this second in time, but there's someone out there that has represented that, and I thought she did an amazing job. So, it's
What
a
I've
beautiful
noticed
dress.
about Naboo royal and senatorial fashion is that it either uses 3 metric tons of fabric or the bare
Yeah,
minimum
yeah,
to get by,
isn't that the
and there's
truth?
nothing in between,
So true
with the
indeed.
exception of maybe Padme's mission outfit that she wore a couple times.
Mhm.
But yeah,
True.
yeah,
Good
because
point.
the bare back, and then the other outfit she wore like was the exposed midriff the entire time. So
Right, yeah, and she did a couple of those in this particular episode too.
exactly, exactly. All right, then. Well, we'll go ahead and start wrapping things up from there. Thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and our discussion of Senate Spy, which was episode 4, season 2 of the Clone Wars. Go check it out if you haven't done so already. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion, and if so, consider subscribing to the podcast on your podcatcher of choice. Right now, we're talking about Clone Wars every Monday. That will get us set aside in April once season 2 of Andor rolls around. Between that and season 2 of Light Magic, we're going to be busy for a few weeks
Yes,
discussing
we
those.
are.
But we will definitely pick up the rest of season 2 and move forward after that. And once you've done that, we would greatly appreciate your ratings and reviews on your podcatcher of choice if those types of things are supported, or comments. We get a lot of feedback lately on YouTube, and I really appreciate that. It's been fun to talk to people over there and get their takes on some of the things that we've been talking about. And Jay will give you some other places that you can interact with us here in just a bit. But again, our entire catalog show is available over on retrozap.com beyond the 100 or 200 episodes that you're likely to get. We're up to episode 864 here, and your podcatcher doesn't typically carry all those. And we've got a lot of content in the back catalog, including a review of every single episode of Rebels, if you enjoyed that show as well. But Jay, with that all having been said, you want to remind everybody what our Facebook and Instagram handles are and where else we can found on the internet.
You got it. We are very easily found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And as always, you can check out our Pinterest boards where we have lots and lots of different Star Wars ideas for just about every occasion, as well as some fun fashion and lifestyle things as well. And then, as Dennis was mentioning, we have our 2 YouTube outlets. So we have the traditional YouTube as well as YouTube Music. And once again, we'd love it if you would share those out, subscribe to the channels, and again, interact, because that's a great place to do it. And then we also have our TeePublic store. And if you do pick up anything over there, it does help to support the show. So hit up that link in our show notes to find one of 7 different show logo designs of your choosing on all kinds of things, from home goods and apparel and all kinds of stuff in between. So once again, that link is in our show notes.
All right. I know you're busy this past weekend with cosplay, so you want to tell everybody all about it and what else they can find what you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm just coming off of a 3-day stint at Fan Expo Cleveland, and so I will be posting lots of pictures from my adventures there, including my debut of 2 new cosplays, which were not Star Wars this time. So I have one from Grimm and one from Schitt's Creek as well. And then I was also part of a fun panel called Wrong Answers Only, which focused on the do's and don'ts of cosplay. So that was on Sunday. And so once again, check that out at j.snips cosplay.
Okay, upcoming on the show this Wednesday, it is part 3 of our Revenge of the Sith series. We recorded this episode. It's a great discussion. Make sure you stick around for that. And then on Friday, we wrap up the week with a look at Star Wars news. So with that said, thanks for listening to episode 864 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.